Hi, my name is DJ Williams, and I'm your host on the podcast Hazing Crimes. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the law and how it impacts us as individuals, but also how everything happens in a criminal legal system and a civil legal system. So two different things. We had to learn a lot of that during the situation with Stone Foltz and the tragedy of his death. So I wanted to share some of that. First of all, on the criminal side, it's not the family that brings charges. It's not the family that has any say on penalty or guilt or even getting it to the court. That is the responsibility of the prosecutor. The criminal prosecutor has to have enough evidence to be able to bring the case to a jury. In this particular case, he ended up taking it to a grand jury before he went into a criminal jury. So one thing is important about all of that is a lot of people think that the Foltz family had something to do with these 8 men coming to trial, and that's not the case. The prosecutor is there for the victim, and so he represented Stone in this particular case. So that's really important to understand. Also, the jury is the one that decides innocence or guilt. And because of that, it then goes to the judge who decides the penalty. He does not decide innocence or guilt, but he does decide the penalty. So again, the Foltz family has nothing to do with any of that. It's the jury and the judge. In this particular case, the judge could have given out a much tougher sentence, but did not. And a lot of people believe that, it's a really tough situation, right? You have somebody who lost his life, and it was a pretty light sentence. So very, very difficult for us to accept a lot of that. But again, nothing in our control. The other part of it is the civil liability side. And with that, we have Rex Elliott, who's going to help us through that. He has helped us with our legal issues and concerns and has become part of the family because he's been by our side since the beginning. And when we made phone calls, he was the first one there. So I'd like everybody to get to know Rex. Rex, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, DJ.
Appreciate you being here. I want to tell you a little bit about Rex. He's a trial lawyer with more than 25 years of complex civil litigation experience. He has numerous multi-million-dollar jury verdicts and settlements, and he takes a client-first approach. I can actually attest to that because that's what happened when we called him about Stone. He's also been an expert witness on various legal topics, also lecturing about trial tactics, and have been called upon judges and high-profile community leaders to handle their legal matters and those of their families and close friends. Thanks again, Rex, for joining us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Honored to be here, DJ, to talk to you about this.
I appreciate, your bio is something that I think is extremely true. There's nothing in that makes me cringe or go, oh my gosh, that's not who the guy is, because you started texting from the beginning. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, and I've said it many, many, many times, and I hope others out there that are listening to this understand it. There's a misconception about lawyers in our system that it's about greed and money and themselves and the whole 9 yards. It's never been about those types of things to me. To me, it's been about achieving our clients' objectives, and more importantly, in addition to that, making changes in our society to make the world a safer place. And in the case of, I've said it many, many times, I've never had a family that went through what you all went through, that walked into my office and asked, how much is that worth? Every single time, and it was true here. The questions, in terms of the objective, number one was accountability. But number two, and equally important, it's not really 1, 2, it's 1 and 1A, was how can we prevent this from happening to another family? That's what drives me to get out of bed, is to serve my clients' needs and objectives, and to also make the world a safer place. I've said it many, many times. if I never have another hazing case the rest of my career, it's going to make me very happy.
Right. Right. I know that was everything that we went through. The most important thing that we talked about was we have to get out there and help people know.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, it was probably the number one feeling that we all had was that we were lost because we didn't know to teach some of the things we've now learned.
Well, no question about it. But if you think about it too, to look at Corey and Sherry and you and the kids, the courage, this happened to Stone on March 4th, the courage to basically 10 days later, listen to me and say, if that's what you want to do, if you want to prevent this from happening to somebody else, you need to get out there right now and get this message out there. And just to think about a mother and a father sitting before the cameras and talking about this experience when they should be just grieving and being with their family and themselves. But all of you stepped right up for that very purpose because you didn't want this to happen to somebody else.
That's exactly right. It was a panic feeling, right? We were afraid that there were going to be more quickly, right? We were in the spring time frame and just coming out of COVID, and you just kind of look at it and go, he's not going to be the last, right? Because a week before, Adam Oakes died.
That's exactly right.
And in a very similar manner.
Yep.
And no, we didn't see the news stream on that. No, we didn't hear about it. It wasn't here in Ohio. I remember, hearing a little bit about the Collin Wyatt situation, but it seems so different that I don't think it registered to me as a hazing scenario. And I certainly didn't think that hazing was still going on. I don't know why. I know that's been one of the biggest things that people say to us. I can't believe it's still happening. And now it's even more risky, right?
No question. It's unfortunately, hazing is very underground, so a lot of people don't hear about it. We hear about the deaths and the bad things that happen, but what people don't understand is that tens of thousands of kids are subjected to hazing every day, and many of them are just fortunate that they get through it without an injury or a death like Stone. But we've cited this statistic many, many times that there's been a death on a college campus in this country every year since 1959 of a kid in a senseless way, with the exception of 2023.
Yeah.
And hopefully people are listening to our message.
I hope so. We're trying to make sure that we're getting it out. You guys are getting it out. We're trying to put, this podcast together in a way that will hopefully hit a listener or two and save a life, right? We're all about saving lives. I think that's been one of the hardest things to measure, right? At the same time, I do think when we get some responses, it reaffirms that we're doing the right thing.
Well, exactly. And I do, people say all the time that these kids aren't listening. I vehemently disagree with that. I think they are listening. I think the problem up to now is they've thought it's not going to happen to me. That's the deal. I think they are now starting to understand there are consequences on both sides, right? The person that's hazed, the person that's the hazer. It can have devastating consequences on both sides. I had a situation with the university this year where I had spoken, you had spoken, the Foltz family and the Wyatt families had been out there and spoken, and there was another hazing incident, and I had to go out to this university and address it. The silver lining to me is that the university found out about it through an anonymous call of one of the freshmen that was about to be hazed. That tells me that these kids are listening and they know it's wrong and they want it to stop as well.
I think that's a great point. I think the idea it's happened in the last couple, Bowling Green and the hockey. It was somebody had the courage to stand up and say, something happened.
That's right. Now
they've done an investigation and it goes where it goes. But I think it's that courage that we have to continue to acknowledge.
Right.
And if one out of the 30 kids that were around Stone could have made a text to 911, could have made a phone call, anything, and he would still be here, right?
100%. And in the university example I just gave you, they shut down the athletic program for a week while they investigated. Universities are now taking this seriously. And to me, that's the important, right? I've said it many times. It's got to be the adults in the room that step in. Judge Coleman was 100% right when he said, if we're going to charge the responsibility to end hazing on 18 to 22-year-old kids, it's never gonna end.
Right.
We have to get the adults in the room to be, taking care of their responsibilities and their role here. One of those is the universities. The other is the national organizations that populate these societies. And so I think we are getting to the point where those adults are understanding they need to take a more active role in this. Gives me optimism for the future that we're not going to continue to see deaths in this area.
So let's go to the hazing side then, right? We all spoke there, and I think you even asked them a question. How many of you were at a couple of those engagements?
I did, and 80% of the hands went up, and I said...
So what about the hazers themselves? I mean, I know we always talk about the victims, and we hear a lot from the victims, but we really don't have that opportunity to talk to a hazer, right?
That is my biggest message, right? Because I firmly believe the kids that are being hazed are just, they're in this system, right? And they don't really have free choice to back away. The hazers themselves, though, have to understand their life can have devastating consequences if something happens. And we talk about it, but the administration of alcohol and drugs in the hazing process has become more and more prevalent over the last 10 to 15 years. That's where a lot of these injuries and deaths are occurring. If you are a hazer now in the state of Ohio, you are going to be expelled from school, and something bad happens, expelled from school. You are going to be in the criminal justice system. You're going to be sued. Every employer is going to know what you did at your college. You're going to have a heck of a time getting back into college. Some of these kids never get back into college. Some kids get back into college, but it's community college.
Okay.
Their life has taken a dramatic turn in just an instance for going through this. So I think the consequences can be horrific for the individuals that are hazing.
So let's talk a little bit about the, misdemeanor versus felony aspect. And as it relates to Stone's case, those individuals were charged under the prior system before Collin's law.
That's right. Yeah. So the tragedy and the blessing of Stone's situation, the tragedy is that Collin's law was drafted and proposed to the Ohio legislature after Collin Wyatt's death. We had a role in that. And it just stalled in the legislature. If it had been law when Stone died, those kids would have been charged with felonies and their punishments would have been much more severe. Stone's death woke up the legislature and they said, okay, we've had enough here in the state of Ohio. And I believe that Stone's death was the catalyst for getting that law passed. And really what it does, there are three really important components to it. One is it does elevate from misdemeanors to felonies, hazing that involves substantial injury or death, and the administration of drugs and alcohol. Really, really important, because before it was a slap on the wrist. Now these kids will face years in prison, and that's a big deal. Secondarily, the law requires educational components. Colleges now have to post on their website in these student organizations the history of hazing within those organizations, so that parents and kids can be more informed about the organizations they're joining. And finally, and I think equally important, is that there's mandatory reporting now. If a college coach, administrator, teacher, professor, you name it, hears of, learns of, has information about hazing on the campus, they have a mandatory duty to report it to law enforcement, not campus security, right? Law enforcement. And if you think about it, it's very much like child abuse. Teachers have a mandatory duty to report it. There is no discretion because of the severity of the criminal act. And there's no difference here now in the state of Ohio in the hazing area.
And people can understand child abuse, right? I think this concept of hazing and using that word is not well understood, right? But child abuse is just abuse in general. And I think that, that there's two other components that I'd like you to reference. One would be around the grooming aspect and the coercion aspect. A lot of people don't understand how all that is working in this particular scenario with that imbalance of powers. So maybe you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, totally. And first thing I'll say is that hazing is abuse. It's no different than child abuse and domestic abuse. Whatever abuse category you have, it is abuse. The reality is that there is this process. And again, we're talking about 18 to 19-year-old boys, right? Who are on a college campus, independent for the first times in their lives, trying to find their way. They're trying to fit in, right? And so typically what happens is the hazing starts with smaller, less serious types of things, wearing backpacks, food runs, laundry. It's all designed to build to a crescendo, which is that much more serious hazing event. And these kids get invested in the process. They're on a college campus. They want to fit in. They don't want to be a quitter. They don't want to walk around campus ashamed of having backed out of an organization. So the reality is these kids don't have voluntary choice. When you get to a moment like Stone had in the Big Brother, Little Brother event, you're so close to getting the brass ring. You're just going to make it through it, okay? And people are telling you this has gone on for years and nothing bad is going to happen. So it really is this imbalance of power, and that's why I've called for pledge programs nationally to be eliminated. That's where all these injuries and deaths are occurring, because the actives have something that the pledges want, and they know they can get them to do just about anything to get there. And if we put a stop to that, the reality is pledge programs are archaic and antiquated. There is no value to them anymore. There are ways to teach these kids the history of the fraternities. There are ways to educate
Google
these
search,
kids.
right?
Exactly.
Call it a day.
Exactly. And by the way, they've already been selected as a good match with a fraternity or sorority. So there is no reason why we don't just let them in right now. We educate them about the fraternity, and then there's not this.
They claim it, right, from the beginning, right? Saying, look, you don't have to do any of these things, or at least they claim that after the fact, right? So if there's no requirement to do any of it, cut out the program.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. By the way, they say it after the fact that you don't have to do this, but it's never verbalized early on. In fact, the insinuation is you do have to do it in order to get in. So if we get rid of that imbalance of power, I think we're going to be way safer. And we combine that with the education, like what we're doing today. Hopefully that's what's going to save lives.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've been researching is just the idea of high school students, right? Especially anybody that's in an athletic program learns about some of the initiation type things, being a rookie and things you got to do. And then this is particular for Stone as well. Then you go to college, right? And you're used to some of that, right? It starts to become normal that when you join something, you've got to do something.
That's right.
Right.
Well, even more importantly, statistics are somewhere between 60 to 70% of kids have already been hazed by the time they get to college. So they've already been indoctrinated to the process and they've survived it. It's, as athletes on a football team, they have to, run around campus in their shorts and no shirts or something like that. They've survived it. So now they think that's the norm. It's like you said, that's how you get into one of these organizations. And by the way, we'll survive it. It'll be okay. No matter how tough it gets, it'll be okay.
Right. I think it's when it's that train with alcohol, right? You're hazing and then you add the alcohol component to it and you're just asking for problems, right?
Totally. And by the way, a lot of these kids don't really have experience with alcohol when they're put in this situation. So again, and in Stone's case, these kids were told, bring a loaf of bread and a gallon of water and email your professors to tell them you're not going to be in class the next day. The implicit message in that is you're going to get sick, but nothing bad's going to happen to you. It's not going to be pleasant for you, but you're going to be perfectly fine. Yeah. And I think that's the mentality that Stone and his pledge brothers had that night is, let me just get through it. Okay, I'm going to feel bad, but I'm going to be fine the next day. And unfortunately, with no experience in alcohol, and by the way, not a lot of experience in alcohol from the individuals that are giving them the alcohol. So it's that's kind of the locomotive that leaves the station and ends up in a situation like Stone.
Yeah, I think that's where you got to kind of get to the root of the problem, right? And our big belief is in high school, middle school, bullying starting. You may not recognize it as hazing, but it's hazing going on as well. And there's no education around the use of alcohol.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And I think that with all the athletes that are out there, the idea of drinking a beer is not going to happen because of too many carbs, too many calories, right? So they go for the high proof alcohol, right? But they have no idea that they just handled a bullet to a kid.
Yeah, it's 100% right. And underage drinking is a problem in and of itself on college campuses. But again, you put this imbalance of power into the equation, and it just can lead to devastating consequences like this. But I want to go back to what we were talking about before, which is people just kind of think, well, it's kind of funny. They're doing these food runs and things of that nature. We got to put a stop to that too, because hazing never ends there. Hazing never ends with the small stuff. It's always building to something else. So
right.
I want that message out there that even the slightest act of hazing, the slightest act of coercing somebody to do something, to join or be a member of an organization, got to put a stop to that as well. It's not right. The reality is, these kids have to understand, I think they are starting to get it. There's nothing cool about hazing. There's nothing good about it. It's no different than drunk driving. There's nothing cool about it. These kids understand that. And as soon as we get to the point where these kids understand there's no value to this stuff, it's not cool, it doesn't make anybody a stronger person, it doesn't build a bond, hopefully we can get rid of this practice altogether. But I do think that getting rid of pledge programs, first and foremost, is the way to do it right now, because I think we can get there, but I want to get there now so there's no more deaths in this country.
Yeah, it's interesting when I take those ideas to other people, right, that are in this industry of understanding hazing, which I didn't know was a thing, but it's a thing. And they kind of look at me and say, I've heard we've had responses like, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Now, this is coming from an organization and a university that has hazing going on, and we know it, right? So you kind of look at this and go, I don't think you're in a position to make that statement.
Yeah.
When you've got all these acts still going on.
Well, that statement has never been made by somebody who's lost a kid
Correct.
To hazing.
That's right.
Okay. And we have, I get very frustrated because we've been talking the same talk for the last 2 or 3 decades. It doesn't work. We have to take dramatic steps right now to save lives. And so it really angers me when somebody says, come on, boys will be boys, or let's not take this away from it. That builds bonds, etc. Those people that are saying that would be in a very different situation and saying something very different if their child had died in a hazing situation. So easy to say if you're not in the shoes of Sherry and Corey.
Yeah, I remember when that was said, and my first thought was our baby did get thrown out.
Exactly.
Right? He was thrown out. He was left behind, right? The idea of just leaving your brother that you had already accepted, all right? You already said you're a match with our organization. They, quote unquote, initiate him, right? And so that he's past all of that, but then you just drop him off and leave him.
Right. That's why these 20, 22-year-old kids are not equipped to put a stop to this. They're just not, their brains aren't fully developed. They are not in a position to stop this. That's why the adults in the room, the universities, national organizations, parents have to step in and say, we're not going to put up with this anymore. I think the educational component of making sure the parents have conversations with their kids about, let's say, even the Greek system, as soon as you get wind of that, I want you out of there. I want you to speak up. I want you to talk to me. And also doing the research on, when you look at Corey and Sherry, they had no ability to understand the Pike fraternity had hazing incidents, deaths, injuries across campuses in this country all over the place for decades.
Right.
If they had known that, if Stone had known that, he never would have been in that Pike fraternity. He never would have been in the situation he was in on March 4th, 2021.
Very good point. We're, as part of our simulation that we do on alcohol poisoning and trying to provide a picture to those students as we're speaking to them so that they can have a visual in their mind that should they see this, you've got to do something about that, right? And everybody worries about getting into trouble or getting that person into trouble, right? And at the end of the day, it could be a life. So to me, there's no decision. You just do it, right?
There really isn't a decision to be made. It's get on that phone immediately, call 911, get help quickly. Most of these universities now have policies in place that if you make those calls, you're immune from punishment. Those universities need to make that clear to these kids, because these kids don't know about it. They don't understand that that's the way. That I think that's what happened in the university example I had. Is kid called and wouldn't leave his name. It was anonymous. We have to have more kids be courageous like that. That's courage. It's not staying silent. It's not, as soon as you see somebody struggling, your first reaction is to try to circle the wagons and figure out how everybody's not going to get in trouble. No, the first response needs to be to help the person in trouble.
I think that part right there was the most shocking to me, and most disappointing, right? Is that they didn't work. I don't know if any of them even gave a crap about whether or not Stone was okay or not. Right. And I know they were told right away not to interact, but I'm telling you what, as a person, as a human, I would think you'd want to be beside him. He was your brother. He just selected him.
He was your brother. I will tell you that I've seen one of those individuals responsible for putting Stone on the couch and leaving him. That kid, the agony in that kid's face is clear. He is going to live the rest of his life regretting that he didn't call 911 immediately. And that's a tragedy as well.
That's right.
So I'm sure if you asked him, gosh, you would have been kicked out of the fraternity, or you would have been punished in some way, or maybe the university would have said, you're immune from this, but don't do it again. I'll bet he would have taken any of those circumstances over what happened here.
Yep, of course. Well, you'd like to think so, right? I think that's part of the issue. You get all wrapped up in what's happening, and they think, they believe it to be a tradition, and no one's gotten hurt before. This idea of pumping stomachs is a joke, right? Well, just go to the hospital and get his stomach pumped. No, he was already dying.
Yeah.
At the event that was going on.
Yeah, I think calling for help and calling 911 is critically important, but we do have to focus on put a stop. Don't even put yourself in that position. I have taught my girls that you got to not put yourself in a position for something bad to happen. So let's start there, right?
Right.
But if it does happen, if something does happen, even if you're not a part of it, particularly if you're not a part of it, call 911, get help there immediately. Like I said before, I've seen the agony on these kids' faces. They'll live the rest of their lives, and they'll never get over the fact that they didn't pick up that phone.
I hate to kind of say this, but it's how I feel, right? I hope at some point, should they have a son or a daughter, that they recognize their actions, hurts a whole family and huge impact on the community, university.
That's right.
I care less about the national organization, because I do think that there's a space there where there needs to be more accountability.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, the swath of damage is so broad. It's not,
you can't even measure it.
No, it's Sherry and Corey and the kids and you and friends and community and university. It's just, it's not just the individual. It's why we got to put a stop to this.
That's right.
Really do.
That's right. Oh, I think that one of the things is I got a lot of things to always ask you. So I'm hoping that maybe you can come back at some point.
I'd be honored to do that.
Because I think that one of the things that I want our audience to hear is just a little bit about what to expect, right? So that you can have that conversation. As a parent, you can't have it too early, right? Just start talking. Use Stone's story. Go to IamStoneFoltz.com and just read the story of him and what his life was like. And then understand what happened to him where he got caught in that basement, right? And could not get himself out of that situation. Have the conversation early, even if your kids are sitting there going, yeah, I get it, Mom. I get it, Dad. You got to keep up with what's happening out there. Things are changing quite quickly. Kids are learning from their phones. And I think that the conversation has to be a little bit deeper about this particular topic so that we can save lives. So with that, please, if you have the opportunity to share this, I really do appreciate you all kind of coming back and hearing about what other things we can talk about. So with that, please share.